Welcome back, guys, to yet another one of my Gotham reviews in episode 3 of season 4. So once again, we're presented with yet another good episode in a season that only keeps getting better and better. And I'm going to be doing this review in the same manner I've been doing it over the past couple of weeks. I'll be starting off with a quick recap of the events of the third episode and my opinion on them, and then I'll be moving on to listing the Easter eggs from this episode. And when speaking of Easter eggs, the emphasis here is going to be on the ones that came right out of the Long Halloween and the Year 1 arcs from the comics. So the third episode started off by presenting us with a Ra's al Ghul origin story. Well, the show's version of his origin story, that is. And that sort of put his age at around 2,000 years. His age in the comics, though, as defined by various versions of his character, ranges between 500 and 700 years. Now, I don't think that really matters, it's just a minor detail in the bigger scope of things. But however, that is not the only difference between his comic book origin and his newly introduced origin on Gotham. I'm guessing here that the sole objective of this scene or sequence of scenes was to establish two aspects to the character of Ra's al Ghul. One, he's really old, and two, the Lazarus Pit is what keeps his age from both showing and from killing him. This, though, is not the last we see of Ra's al Ghul on this episode, but I'll be circling back to that later on in this review. Now on the Bruce Wayne front, and right after his first encounter with Penguin's men early on in the events of this episode, it was kind of funny how Alfred was sort of a bit vindictive as he stitched Bruce's wound. I do like the way Alfred has been acting as a mentor to Bruce all the way through. I also thought the scene with Bruce visiting the docks the second time around, no actual face covering mask, nothing, that was fun to watch, especially with Alfred kicking in and joining the action. Now on another note, I really like the change they made to Barbara. The crazy she had to her name over the course of the past couple of seasons was kind of starting to get a bit repetitive. Don't get me wrong though, that was kind of fun to watch back then, but it did get old over time, and they did change her character at the perfect timing. But Barbara's makeover did not just involve a change in the way she conducts herself, but also clearly involves a change of appearance. The pantsuit is definitely a change to her outer appearance, but also happens to be reflective of a change to her character into a more grounded, less whimsical, and crazy person. Now Barbara's interest in the knife that ended up in Bruce's possession, Selina's relaying of her words to Bruce about Barb's client being a very dangerous guy, that all clearly pointed to Ra's al Ghul being Barbara's benefactor ahead of the reveal. Before the episode is over though, it's made clear that he's not just her benefactor, but that he's also trained her within the League of Assassins. But we also get the reveal of how Barbara made it back to life, and it's not that she didn't die on the finale of season 3, but she was rather revived using the Lazarus Pit. But on the subject of characters that made it back from the dead or something similar to being dead, Edward Nygma has broken out of his ice casing, and he has Myrtle Jenkins to thank for that, one seemingly insane old friend of his. Now I did like Myrtle's character, and hated how they ended it before the episode was over. She was gonna make a good, crazy addition to the series, and she was starting to grow on me so fast. And I was actually thinking for a moment there that Gotham might after all make her into the Riddler's sidekick. But here's one last stray yet quick comment before I move on to the Easter eggs on this episode. So apparently Morena Baccarin is credited on every single episode this season so far, making it highly probable she'll be back pretty soon to resume her role as Lee Tompkins. I just don't think they'd be crediting her on every single episode just for the sake of that one brief scene she had on episode 2. But let's speak Easter eggs on episode 3, and as usual, remember to drop me a comment if I happen to have missed any. Number 1. Now when we get to see Bruce in action for the very first time after putting on his first Batman costume on last week's episode, Selina Kyle is right there as well. So on one hand, we've got Bruce trying to find out information about the contents of a shipment coming into the docks for Penguin, but on the other hand, we've got Selina trying to steal from that very same shipment at the very same time. And she's sort of in her very first Catwoman costume the show plans on presenting us with. Let's just call it a prototype costume, because it sort of has ways to go before it's kind of representative of her comic book costume. But that entire scene, that's just classic comic book Batman and Catwoman running into one another or being in the same place at the same time, with her stealing from the very same thing he's sort of investigating. But anyway, considering the front half of the season is based on the Long Halloween comic book arc, I expect the incident will repeat over and over again. But let's move on to number 2. Sophia Falcone. Now she plays a major role in the Long Halloween arc in the comics, so her making an appearance on the first half of the season is not really some sort of random coincidence there. Now it is true that Falcone has other children, but with the death of his son Alberto early on in the events of this arc in the comics, she basically ends up becoming his second in command, doing his bidding all across the board. Now in Gotham, she clearly has an endgame from the get-go. She basically wants to take over her father's empire in Gotham, fulfilling her comic book destiny as heir to Carmine Falcone. But I've got to admit, the role is very well acted so far, and very promising as well. So at first, she's like giving Gordon this look that indicates she's angry when she realizes who he is, that being her brother's killer. But then when they end up meeting again later on, her words indicate she thinks differently, like she seems to be more understanding of him ending up having to kill Mario. That was also followed by her initiating that kiss by the ocean. But finally, there was her admission she's made her decision from the moment she laid eyes on him. She planned all along to come back to Gotham and take over, and every single bit of the way she has managed to present us with a very believable act. So yeah, I kinda believe at the moment that the choice of the actress is pretty spot on. But speaking of number 3 on my list of Easter eggs, so apparently Carmine Falcone is dying. Now if you haven't read The Long Halloween before, that might sound like something the show might have made up just to push the newly introduced daughter into Jim's life. But the truth is, it is the show's way of staying as true to the comic book arc as it could. The final events of the Long Halloween arc in the comics sees Falcone actually dead, only instead of it being illness, he's shot by Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face. But Carmine's death on this arc would be the thing that would lead Sophia to become the head of the Falcone crime family and the Batman villain known as the Hangman. Now the Hangman in the comics is quite similar to the holiday killer from the Long Halloween arc, only instead of taking out members of the Falcone family on each holiday, Sophia took out members of law enforcement. Whether or not she ends up doing that on the series is still subject to speculation, even though I personally don't think Gotham is planning to take her character in that direction. But moving on to number 4, so Alfred emphasizing Bruce's other masks, that kind of initially felt like a hint at Bruce's place amongst the rich elite of Gotham. Instead though, it led to Bruce using another mask, putting on that cap, visiting the docks, going all Italian accent. So apparently it was just a hint at Bruce developing his detective skills from the comics, rather than just being the caped vigilante of Gotham, relying heavily on his costume and fighting skills. But moving on to number 5, once more Alfred advises Bruce to put on another kind of mask, the mask that would have him behave like a spoiled brat, the way Bruce refers to it, and which is basically what he does in the comics. As a result, we'll see Bruce not only becoming the spoiled brat of a teenager in public, but also the womanizing carefree person people would end up thinking he is in the comics. That was kind of funny though, the way he overplayed the spoiled brat during that scene. I believe the acting for Bruce Wayne in general is getting better. He has never been my favorite on the show, not by a long shot, but there's definitely some sort of improvement there. But here comes the last of the Easter eggs, and number 6. Now Barbara's revival by the magic of the Lazarus Pit, that felt very reminiscent of a couple of revivals using the same waters over the past few seasons of the CW's Arrow. We've got Thea Queen's revival on the 3rd season of Arrow, and there was also Sarah Lance's on season 4. But there was also the close relationship between Barbara and Ra's al Ghul. Now that is in a way as well reminiscent of the Sarah Lance arc on Arrow, only instead she had a relationship with his daughter Nyssa. But all in all, and as I mentioned when I first started this video, it was a pretty good episode. It did manage to both bring back old characters and introduce new ones. I'm guessing I'm most excited here about having Nigma back on the scene. Ra's al Ghul on the other hand only made it to one scene this season before episode 3, watching Bruce Wayne from a distance on the opening scene of the premiere, but it does seem pretty clear we'll be seeing a lot more of him going forward. Sophia Falcone, on another note, seems like an extremely interesting addition to the series, both in terms of her character and the actress portraying the role. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more of her on the next few episodes. But as per the usual, let me know in the comments what you thought of the 3rd episode of the season and if you like season 4 so far. Did you enjoy the introduction of Sophia Falcone? Do you share my opinion that the way the actress portrayed the role on this episode so far is pretty promising? Remember as well to drop me a comment telling me if there are any Easter eggs on this episode that I might have missed. But finally, let me know if you like the content of this video by slapping it a much appreciated like, and while you're at it, you can always subscribe and enable notifications. And until I see you next time, thank you all for tuning in, and have a good one.